Yeah, so again, my name is Rachel, and I'm here in my capacity as the coordinator of the Earth Sangha Circle for the Nottingham Centre. And I actually just want to spend a good amount of time at the beginning introducing myself in a bit more detail, in a way, in this particular role and my sort of journey to be in this role and what it means. And I'll kind of explain why I'm going to give you all that detail later. So just to start with some context. So Earth Sangha is a Triratna-wide organization thing that started last year sometime. And I became coordinator for Nottingham October last year. Yeah. So this group was started by a group of order members across the country who, light is throwing me off, okay. Sometimes light, sometimes not light. So I started by a group of order members who felt a need to come together, and respond in a way to the climate and ecological emergency through the context of Triratna, within that context and from that context. And they started it with an idea of sort of three different levels of what they were trying to do. So the first level was this need that they saw to support each other in their vision of what's happening with the emergency and what needs to happen and the gap between those things, and supporting each other in that. That was the first level. And the next level they wanted to do was really support the Triratna in general community with facing into it as well, because it's some really difficult stuff. So that was part of what they want to do, is help the wider Sangha. And then the third level is really out in the world. So in coordination with other groups who are also trying to face the emergency in one way or another, trying to have an influence and express a voice out in the world. And so the Nottingham Buddhist Centre version of that, our subset of that, is trying to do the same three things. And so a bit of how I came to be coordinator. So just to start with a real confession in a way, is that until about 3 years ago, I'd say that I was completely asleep, really, to what was going on with the climate. And it's really kind of amazing when I look at that and how that was possible, because I'm a pretty well-educated person. I had friends and acquaintances who were really quite awake and involved with the crisis. People who'd worked their whole lives, actually, in working towards trying to make a change about it. And yet I never found myself in conversation with them about it. I never, to any great degree. And I never really, I think I saw it as something that was for certain people. So those people, those friends, those people who were really involved, who started an eco community, who, worked so hard to get for these things, that was sort of a particular interest. That was for them a particular thing that they did. And I don't know why. I didn't look into it. I didn't engage with it. So it wasn't until 3 years ago, and it was actually an evening here at the center, which some of you may have been at, I don't know. It was led by Karanavacha and Satchanama, who was here at the time. And it was at the same time, I think it was in sort of springtime 2019, it was the same time that Extinction Rebellion did some of their first big things in London. The Fridays for Future, the school strikes were happening around then as well. At this evening at the center, we were really encouraged as Buddhist practitioners to turn towards our emotions around what's happening around the climate. And to start to let those in a bit and start to be with each other and talk to each other about it. And it was on that night that I basically started to do that and started to kind of let it in. And it's been an ongoing, continues to be a process for me 3 years later in terms of how much of it I can let in at one time and how much time I have to kind of take a break from that and not particularly be in it. But from that night, I really felt compelled to do something to address. See? And I began this real search for what that thing was that I could do. And again, this is an ongoing process. And I've tried different things so far. I've tried, so during COP26 last year, that's when Earth Sangha started here. We went and sat in the market square for an hour a day for 2 weeks during that, meditating and talking to people who passed by. I've tried knocking on doors with Extinction Rebellion, so talking to people on their doorsteps about what's going on, how they feel about it, encouraging people to come to talks, to understand more, to get involved. I've tried a few local actions here in Nottingham, a bit of standing in the street with people dressed in scuba gear, if I remember right. I've gone to London a couple of times, just a couple of times for a couple of days. And I've become the coordinator for the Earth Sangha Circle. And those things I've done, and they've all been part of this kind of trying to find what it is. And I've really noticed how much time I spent. A lot of those things I've just said, I've done really quite recently. And I noticed how much time I spent, how much energy I put into actually trying to find the right thing that I could do, the thing. And I realized I've really been trying to search for the solution, as if I could solve it, as if I could do it. It's actually quite painful, that, because I really do want to solve it. But the other thing I've noticed is how much better I feel when I do any of those things that I just said and do them with other people. Yeah. Even though there's no way any of those things I did, those aren't going to solve it on their own. But I feel so much better. I feel so much better, and I feel like it does feel like part of the answer. It does feel like something. Yeah. So I say all of this long introduction to really highlight, well, for a couple of reasons, actually. First of all, to be really clear about how little I've actually done so far in my life in this area. And to show that I'm sort of not, I wouldn't consider myself an environmentalist. I wouldn't consider myself an activist. In a way, as I said before, I've kind of thought that this was work for other people, for people who were those things. So now I want to turn to the theme of this Buddhist Action Month as a whole that we've had talks on the last couple of weeks and will again next week. Our theme is compassion and connection in times of crisis, which works really well for my talk. So I'm going to talk about compassion, connection, and crisis, but in a different order. I'm going to start with crisis. So this is the really difficult part of the talk for me. So as I said, I'm not an environmentalist or an activist, but what I am is a person who's become convinced that without really a radical change in direction, really by our governments, some really, really bad stuff is going to happen. And it's hard to say, I can't say what that's going to be. I can't sort of pinpoint what that's going to be. But it's things like famine, things like war, things like society breaking down, in this country in 10 to 20 years. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, as highly possible. So a lot of these things already come to other countries, other places. The weather events we're already seeing all around the world. It's happening now. It's happening now. British Columbia, where I went as a child every summer in Canada. Never had forest fires that I remember at all from my childhood. In the last 3 or 4 years, I was there in the summers. Every year, the forest fires were so bad, the smoke is terrible. Anyway, it's happening now. So it's hard to take this kind of thing in. This is why I wanted to do as much metta as we did earlier. And part of what I think it's hard to take in, and maybe doesn't even sound true, is that we're not hearing this from our media. So the media isn't really saying what's going on. I mean, they are. There'll be a story that says, the polar ice caps are melting. They're much faster than we expected. There'll be that kind of story here and a story there. But you think about COVID, when COVID started, right? And it's like the news was COVID, and it was like all this stuff. And then maybe if there's a little bit more news that came afterwards. And it feels to me like that's the way where the climate crisis should be. Yeah. So I'll just mention a couple more things by way of the crisis, and then we can move on to compassion and connection. I'm sure many of you may be much more well-informed than I am about sort of what's going on, but a couple of things to mention. Last year, the IPCC, which is a UN body that looks at climate, has looked up for over 20 years or something, in their latest report said that there was a code red for humanity, that we needed to make changes in the next few years, really the next few years, big changes. On the 4th of April this year, the UN Secretary General said that unless governments everywhere reassess their energy policies, the world will be uninhabitable. So it's the UN Secretary General. And before that, a few days before that, this is the other bit that's quite key. He also said that despite growing pledges of climate action, so we do hear these things, don't we, that, there's these pledges of what we're going to do about it. But despite those pledges, global emissions are at an all-time high, and they continue to rise. So actually, in the last 10 years, we've continued to emit more gases year on year, more and more, when we need to, I think we need to cut it in half in the next few years and then get to zero by 2030 to avoid the worst. So things are different from, I think, what the general story that we may pick up is. And this is what I've come to believe, this is what I've come to see. And these are all things that, you can look up for yourself if you'd like to. There's one more thing I think I've asked Aryabhachan to put, or I think maybe Rick to put in. There's something called the Chatham House Risk Assessment. So Chatham House is an international body, it's a think tank. They've done a risk assessment about the climate. I'll just mention that, I won't say what they've said, but it's something that you could look at. It is also quite dire. Okay, so it's a crisis, yeah? So how do we respond? How do we respond to this kind of thing? Yeah. With compassion, with wise compassion. And it's just really important, I think, that we really start, and as I said, with the meditation, that we really start with our self-metta and self-compassion. It's really difficult. So the Buddhist word for compassion is karuna, which is an aspect of metta. And what it is it's not a warm, fuzzy feeling necessarily. It could be, but that's not the important bit. And we actually talk about what we call near enemies of karuna. So these are things that kind of maybe look like compassion, but aren't. And two of the ones we talk about a lot are sentimental pity, so kind of all sort of thing, and horrified anxiety, so kind of just the fear and the just frozenness. So those are the two things that we're trying to kind of, it's a bit of a balancing act. What we're looking for is karuna. What karuna is it's a spontaneous desire to act, to relieve suffering. So it's a desire to act, and including our own suffering, So as I've said, I think we in this room are going to suffer effects of the climate crisis. And I have a very honest friend, who I won't name, who says that they're very concerned about the climate crisis, but that they enjoy their comfortable life. Enjoy their comfortable life, and I'm like that. I'm like that too. As I said, there's a way that I can just put this aside and get on with my daily life and get on with making dinner, and yeah, and I want to do that. I'm much more drawn to doing that than to bringing my attention towards the crisis. Yeah, but I guess, yeah. And that's part of self-compassion, I think. I think that's an important part of self-compassion, is taking that time that I need to do those things and to maybe look away for a bit. And I think a really important part is to turn towards, as much as I can, what's happening, and do what I can. Take collective action, work with others to try to mitigate that. So, yeah, I'll talk a little bit. I want to talk a bit about wise compassion and the Buddha being amazing for this, for the way that his compassion would come out in such a wise way. So I'm just going to tell the story quickly, which many of you will have heard, but perhaps some people haven't, which is the story of Kisagotami and the mustard seed. Yeah, so you've heard it. But there are people who haven't, right? So I will say a little bit. So Kisagotami was a woman who lived in the Buddhist time, and her child died. So she was driven mad with grief by this. And so she was walking from house to house with her dead child in her arms and asking for medicine at each house, saying, "My child is sick. Do you have medicine to help my child?" And every house she went to, the people said, "I'm sorry, dear, but your child is dead, and there's no medicine that will help. There's no medicine that will help." And she just kept going on and on to the next house, until finally one person, and there was wisdom in this as well, said to her, "Well, I don't have any medicine that will help, but the Buddha is very wise. Perhaps you should go to the Buddha and see what he can do." So she takes her child to the Buddha. "Please, can you help me? Is there any medicine you have for my child?" And the Buddha looks at her and looks at the child, and he says, "Yes," says, "I can make a medicine." And she's just overjoyed, and he says, "But I will need a mustard seed." And then she says, "Oh, because a mustard seed is something that we would have in every house in that area at the time." And he said, "But one more thing, the mustard seed needs to be from a house where nobody has ever died." So Kisagotami sets off, and she starts going again to all the houses, and she knocks on the door, and, "Do you have a mustard seed?" And everyone says, "Oh, yes." And they start to go to get one, and then she says, "Well, and the other thing is, has anybody ever died in this house?" Of course, at each house, and again at this time, people died at home. So in each house, they had stories of their loved ones, grandparents, parents, people who died in the home. And so Kisagotami goes to several houses and keeps getting this answer and hearing these stories from people, until eventually something kind of settles in for her, and she realizes something about the universal nature of her loss. Yeah, the fact that this is something that we all share. And she calms down, and she buries her child, and she goes to the Buddha and asks to become his disciple. I believe she becomes enlightened quite quickly after that as well. So I just have always found it such a lovely story of what wise compassion. So the compassion to not say, no, the compassion to say, "Yes, I can help you," and the task he set out for her to do. So I will have us come back to this. I'd like us to hopefully break into groups later, and to just think a bit about, what's maybe the start of a wise, compassionate response for us to what we see. But I suggest that part of the answer, for me anyway, to this is connection. So taking us to the third, from crisis to compassion to connection. So just to say, first of all, that we're all connected, and we're all complicit in a way with the situation that we're in now, in terms of so I think it's really important to not be sort of individually blaming or shaming people, whether ourselves or others, about maybe how many international flights I've taken and how much I've driven my car and all those sorts of things, because because this problem wasn't caused individually, and it won't be solved individually. And no matter how much effort I put into reducing my carbon footprint, it won't begin to touch the problem, except insofar as it affects others too, except insofar as it's part of a connected network. So it's the system that needs changing, and it's only going to be changed together. So I've been struck by my, the thing I said at the beginning about how I wanted to do something, and I've been trying to figure out what it is I do to find the thing that I can do to solve this single-handedly, and how totally overwhelming that is. I've been struck by how similar that is to the Bodhisattva ideal, which is, again, something some of you will be very familiar with and some of you maybe not. So the Bodhisattva ideal is this idea, the Bodhisattva vow is, so Bodhisattva is someone who's very close to enlightenment. Okay. So they can see me, okay. This is good because I can see them in the same place, okay. So can they still not hear though? Somebody just went like this. Okay, you can hear, excellent. So the Bodhisattva vow. Bodhisattva is someone who could become very close to enlightenment, but decides that before he or she becomes enlightened, the vow is they will take all beings with them. So they will lead all beings to enlightenment. So we looked at it as an individual vow, an individual ideal. It's totally overwhelming, isn't it, to lead all beings to enlightenment. But so Sangharakshita's answer to this, or Sangharakshita's way of describing it to us and to the order, is that so he envisioned the order as a whole as one bodhisattva. So that's the Triratna Buddhist order, so that Karanavacha and Aryavachan belong to. So the whole order is one bodhisattva, a bodhisattva called Avalokiteshvara. And Avalokiteshvara has 1,000 arms, 1,000 arms. He's the bodhisattva of compassion. And he reaches out to the world with these 1,000 arms, each with a different tool in it, each with a different implement, a different way of helping the world. And so Sangharakshita described the order as this one bodhisattva, with each order member being one of the arms, with their own tool, their own skills, their own sphere of influence, but all working together as one bodhisattva. So I suggest that could apply to all of us as part of this community as well. We each have a particular tool, a particular strength, a particular sphere of influence. And so a wise, compassionate response, at least for me, is not my individual actions, lovely as they may be, but the wise, compassionate response must mean working together, both sort of within our Sangha, within other groups that we're part of, and within the wider community. And as it applies to this problem, with other groups and other groups that are working towards doing something about this. So we're up against greed, hatred, and delusion writ very large. So we're going to need all 1,000 arms. And the good news is that we're on excellent training ground, as Buddhist practitioners or as people interested in Buddhism and looking at it. Within Buddhism, we train in being present, we train in gratitude, in metta, and these are trainings for action. These are trainings that allow us to go out there in the world and do what we need to do. We train in spiritual friendship, in particular in Triratna. It's a particular strength. So in that connection that will support us and help to keep each other awake. Because I think this is something that, as I was saying, with the tendency to want to go back to just pretending things, at least for me, are how they were, how I used to see them. So I actually want to read a poem, which is here, which I just found recently, which I really like, and this is about us keeping each other awake. And it's called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. It's by William E. Stafford. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. So in the spirit of that, keeping each other awake, being together, working together, I would like to extend an invitation to you to an action that Earth Sangha will be taking next Saturday, so 10 days from now. We'll be joining in, again, in the spirit of joining in with others, organization. It's an organization, it's a movement called Sit for Climate. And yeah, there's a link for that as well, if that could go in the chat. And it is something, it's modeled after clapping for carers. If you remember, we did at the beginning of the pandemic. So the sort of Thursday nights at 8 p.m. going out and clapping. The idea is every Saturday at 11 a.m., you can sit outside anywhere with a little cardboard sign that says Sit for Climate. And anybody can do this anywhere. There's been a group doing this in Sherwood now for the past couple of months at least. And it's been growing and growing. I think we had 15 people there last week, maybe more. Yeah. So we'll be doing that as Earth Sangha. 11 a.m. It's just for 10 minutes is what they do. In Sherwood, they tend to sit for more like half an hour or a bit longer. So we might do a bit longer. But it's really, yeah. Oh yeah, and I've written down that I was going to invite you and you and you. Yes, everyone by name. You're all very welcome to come. And again, that's not going to do anything, right? It's not going to solve the problem, certainly. But what it's going to do is it's going to provide a place for us to support each other. It's going to provide a place for us to talk to each other, to keep each other awake, to maybe help a few more people wake up. And so it's part of a connected process that I think does help. The second invitation I want to extend to you is to keep talking about this, because it's a really difficult thing to talk about, isn't it? And I don't know how this has landed with you. I don't know what your own views are, how you feel about this, but to keep talking with me, with others in the Sangha, with your friends, with your family. I think it's a thing that's, just doing that could help a lot, actually. So, good, we're in good time. I was hoping that we could break into groups, maybe of 3 or 4, and then you can talk about whatever you like in those groups, but a couple of questions I thought might be good to talk about it. The first one is how can you start to find, because I think it's a really big question, but how can you maybe start? What's the first step that you individually could maybe take to find a wise, compassionate response to what's going on? If you want to, the first question maybe to ask yourself is, do you want to find a wise, compassionate response to this? And if so, what could that be? And then secondly, for us as a Buddhist center, your thoughts on what would be a wise, compassionate response or a start to that. So those are a couple of thoughts. So to form groups of 3 or 4, I don't know, Rick, if you can put people into breakout groups for that. Oh, are you down to 3 people online? I'm just not seeing them, maybe. Yes, and then for us in the room, how could we do it? Karanavacha and Aryavacha, are you both happy to kind of be in groups, help people? Yeah, maybe Claire, are you happy to do that too? Yeah, okay, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We probably do 5 groups of 3 actually. So we need one more leader, maybe. Yeah, we don't really need them. But yeah, but Anthony, would you be willing to kind of help? Excellent. Okay. So that means let's count off in, well, we know the leaders, so other people count off in 5s, right? Yeah, okay. So Dan, do you want to go first? So what did you say number 1? Did you say that? Yeah, sorry. 2, 3, 4. So you're back to 1. Are you good with that? Okay. So you don't need a number, Karanavacha.
I don't need it.
No, we'll figure that out later. So I don't know your name, so you're fine. Hannah. Hannah, great.